Buffalo Bills take down the Baltimore. We knew that this was going to be the best game that we saw this weekend, and it absolutely was. Came down to the very last play, and this one ended in a 27-25 victory for the Buffalo Bills, who will face the Kansas City Chiefs. And we'll get to a little bit more of a Bills-Chiefs preview at the end of the show when we talk about what Kansas City is bringing to the table from what we saw this weekend. Let's look at the early grades. Now, these are the final grades, but we do have some early grades here from this game, and we'll give you the top 5. So we'll start with the Buffalo Bills and the top 5 players there. Defensive tackle Ed Oliver standing up in a big way in this game. I've criticized their interior defensive line over the last couple of weeks throughout this season, but boy, did they show up big in this one. He's at the top of the list with an initial 85.7. Offensive tackle Spencer Brown behind him with an 82.5. Defensive tackle Daquan Jones with an 81.4. Wide receiver Khalil Shakir with a 78.8. Edge rusher Greg Rousseau rounding it out at number 5 with a 78.8. And then quarterback Josh Allen. Not his best grade. It's a 69.3, but it's certainly not the worst and was exactly what they needed to get it done and seal this win, get to the AFC Championship. On Baltimore's side of things, Kyle Van Noy was their top-graded player with an 81.3. Defensive tackle Nnamdi Madubuike with an 80.9. Running back Justice Hill a 79.1. Safety Kyle Hamilton a 79.0. And then safety Ardarius Washington a 78.9. Lamar Jackson in this game, again, not his best. And we'll get into exactly what went into that. But ultimately, spit on an initial 71.1 overall grade. You and I sort of have the same stat that told the story here. We're just going to talk about it, I think, from two different sides of the coin and what happened with this result. So I'll leave it to you first, your stat that told the story and how you want to talk about this one here.
There are often in big games teams that beat themselves, right? And I think we have more than one game this weekend that ended up like this. But the Ravens, I think one thing we've seen, they played clean football almost the entire season, right? I think, Lamar Jackson only threw, 4 interceptions the entire regular season?
Yeah.
I think it was.
Yes.
I mean, and it just seemed like the Ravens, especially early, they made too many, actually all the way through, all the way down to the last play, they made too many mistakes, right? Lamar with an early interception on, I'm not sure if it looked like a miscommunication with Rashad Bateman or just, what happened there, if he got jammed up in coverage or what. But you have an interception, that didn't lead to points, but he also had a fumble that directly led to a touchdown in the second quarter that, honestly, at a certain point, I know Lamar's a playmaker, but you have to just let a play die when it's dead, right? Sometimes just live to play the next down. The Mark Andrews fumble in the fourth quarter is going to stand out big time. That led to a Bills field goal, which we'll also get into momentarily. And then obviously Jackson drives them all the way down at the end, gets within 2 points. Andrews is wide open at the front pylon, drops the football. It's just a game where, when you're going to beat a great team and a great offense like the Ravens, it helps when they make some mistakes, right? And I think it took them a while to get the engine running in the run game, but I think we're going to remember, and the Ravens are going to really kick themselves for all of the mistakes that they made in this football game. And I do think the other element to this, some of it is the Zay Flowers injury kind of hurt him, I think, and especially in the passing game. And then later in the game when Rashad Bateman went down, and they still managed to improvise an almost game-tying drive with, Andrews and Tylan Wallace and Isaiah Likely and just cobbling it together on the outside. It just, at the end of the day, there wasn't quite enough, and there was too many mistakes in order to dominate this game, and they were the team in the game that really, they beat themselves. The first team you can't let beat you is yourself, and I think that's a big part of why the Ravens lost this game.
Coaches say it all the time for a reason. We talk about it as coaching cliche of not turning the ball over, but at the end of the day, if you don't at least check that box and say, hey, we didn't do so much to beat ourselves in this game, then obviously you have a chance. And it's a professional game. You go back and forth. The margin for error is very slim, but look, I think the Ravens, it's tricky to say the better team because I thought that these were two very evenly matched teams going up against each other, and it was a great game that we saw, but I think the Ravens played better in this game. They just didn't have the detrimental turnover. So the Bills' floor was a lot higher than what the Ravens was, but the Ravens had a higher EPA per play on offense, obviously had a lower EPA per play allowed on defense because of it. That's how it works with the vice versa. So I think the Ravens, in a lot of categories, were the better team. But the fact of the matter is, the Bills won the game because they played very cleanly. And we'll talk about Sean McDermott. It's definitely a talking point that we need to get to. But teams do take on the identity of their head coach. And the fact that Buffalo is so good at the fundamentals and the floor of this team is so high is what allowed them to win this game. Did they have the ceiling necessarily, the aggressiveness to be able to keep up with Baltimore? I would tell you no. But they didn't have to because they didn't shoot themselves in the foot the way that the Baltimore Ravens did. When you look at the Buffalo Bills, 0 drops in this game, 0 fumbles, 0 interceptions, 1 penalty for 10 yards. And this is a game that weather played a big factor. It was frigid in this game. And even when it wasn't snowing, you know the cold was affecting these players and how they moved and how focused they were. Obviously, every time they hit the turf, it looked like, it felt like they were slamming on concrete because of how cold it was. So the weather and the conditions absolutely affected this game, and they played that clean. That is a clean slate of football. And on the other side of things, the Baltimore Ravens, 3 drops, 3 fumbles, 2 of them lost, 1 interception, 5 penalties for 43 yards. In a close game with 2 very evenly matched teams, that team's going to lose almost every single time. And the only reason why that almost wasn't the case is because the other team had Lamar Jackson. And even though he did have turnovers in this game that we uncharacteristically have not seen from him this season, so the turnovers were very uncharacteristic of him, he was still able to play hero ball for them. I mean, how many times in that game did you see Lamar escape the pocket, stay cool under pressure, find somebody over the middle, backside dig routes, deep passes? Like, I know that the first interception that he had obviously was a misfire on a deep shot, but he hit plenty of other deep shots to give his team the ability to win this football game. But what this comes down to is that not only did the Ravens shoot themselves in the foot, it was about how clean Buffalo played. And if you're going to go into Kansas City and do something that they have not done over the last 5 years, and that's go into Kansas City and beat them in the playoffs, that's the type of football that you do have to play. So even though there's another part of this conversation that I know we'll get to, them being able to do that is why they won this football game.
I think this edition of this Bills-Chiefs rivalry now might be the most fascinating one because it's something we've brought up in a couple of previous weeks this year, is that the Bills this year play more like the Chiefs than ever, right? Avoiding negative plays and just continuing to move forward and get first downs. That's what the Chiefs do best, especially this year with probably the least explosive offense that we've seen out of them, even with the last 2 years of not having Tyreek Hill, and they've kind of transitioned to the short passing game and the run game and just moving the chains. The Bills play more like that than ever. Allen's running his best turnover-worthy play rate of his career. They just don't beat themselves very often anymore, right? I can only think of maybe one game this year, the Texans game where Allen was like 9 for 30 or whatever it was. That was the only game they really beat themselves this year. If they can go on the road and play this clean brand of football, and they ran the ball 60% of the time in this game. Mm-hmm. I mean, and you're talking about the Ravens
they were also excellent at it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a part where the Bills' ability, obviously there's going to come a moment, probably next week in Kansas City, where Allen's got to be the hero. But he didn't necessarily have to do it today, even though there was one moment where I kind of would have preferred that they let him be the hero. But, we can have that argument. Their ability to not solely rely on Allen, to rely on their trench play, the run game. The defense did step up today. This was, in run defense, this was about as good a game as they possibly could have played against this opponent. And just their ability not to beat themselves, that's huge. I mean, I think we see this now from the best teams all remaining, right? I think you look at the Bills, they've been as good as anybody this year. The Chiefs, they always do it. They never beat themselves. Washington and Jaden Daniels, they don't beat themselves. And the Eagles, for the most part, don't beat themselves either. They'll hand the football off, they'll play defense. Complementary football is the theme of all 4 of these teams, and the Bills are doing it better than they ever have.
Yeah. Look, my most impressive in this game was the Buffalo Bills offensive line. Not just of how they were ass kickers up front when it came to running the ball the way that they needed to. I mean, Josh Allen in this game was the 4th leading rusher, and that's not often the case. I think that they would like for their running backs to really be able to take most of the carries, and Josh Allen doesn't have to take the punishment. But Allen had the 2nd most carries in this game, but he only had 20 rushing yards. Normally, when that's the case, you go, this offense probably wasn't operating the way that it needed to. But when you look at the yards per carry average, James Cook, shade under 4, was 3.9, but then Ty Johnson at 6.2, Ray Davis at 7.3. Like, these guys were able to be efficient. And I think just throughout this game, they were able to continue to pound the rock the way that they needed to. And kudos to Buffalo's offensive line, which has been one of the better offensive lines, certainly down the stretch in the second half of the season. They were great in pass protection as well. Only 4 pressures allowed in this game. So really being able to mitigate what the Baltimore Ravens have been better at, I would say, since they sort of changed things up on the defense. You and I did an episode where we talked about, hey, it wasn't just moving Kyle Hamilton and Ardarius Washington to safety spot. It was everything that sort of went along with that. You're moving Marlon Humphrey into the slot. You're blitzing a little bit less. You're letting guys get home with 4 a little bit more because you're comfortable with the guys on the back end. And so Buffalo was just able to mitigate that pretty well. And again, not to say it was easy for them, but they stepped up to the challenge. And I think, again, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because we'll talk about exactly what went into the Texans and the Chiefs game, but a big Achilles heel for the Texans that entire game, especially those last couple of drives, and especially that very last drive, was not being able to protect. I'm not nearly as worried about that with this Buffalo Bills offensive line. It's going to play pissed off, and they're going to play ready for these guys. So in a little bit of a recap, but also looking forward thing, them being my most impressive is incredibly important for them to go into Kansas City and try to mitigate a pass rush that has a lot of different things that can throw at you, especially a future Hall of Famer in Chris Jones. So that was my most impressive in this game. Who was your most impressive?
I'm going the trenches on the other side, and you saw some of those guys in that top 5. The defensive line, if the initial grades hold here, because I have their defensive line as a unit at an 81.6 overall in this game and an 82.3 run defense grade, that's their best performance of the season in both of them. And you saw guys who at times have struggled this year. Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones. We got Greg Rousseau off the edge. Von Miller, you see a little bit. He had the big fumble return that put him near the 20-yard line. This defensive line played its best game of the season, and I think there's a couple of elements to this. When Derrick Henry runs for at least 90 yards, Ravens are 11-0 this year. 84 yards in this game. When he's under 90 yards, 2-6. And I think the defensive, they just set a tone early. There was a surge in the third quarter. A large chunk of the Ravens rushing came in that third quarter surge when they almost tied they went for 2 and still didn't get it. They almost tied the game, but they had a big drive where they just pretty much ran the whole way down. But other than that one drive, the Bills' run defense was fantastic. It started up front, and in the first half, the Ravens as a team only had 14 yards before contact. They needed to come out, and at the very least, early in the game, the plan is clear against the Ravens. It's not easy to do with the freaks they have in the backfield, but stop the run early, get ahead of them, hopefully by 2 scores, which they did. That drive that the Bills scored the touchdown right before the half to go up 21-10, massive. Massive to get up 2 scores on that team that's shorthanded at receiver and wants to run the football, because it is a little bit harder and it takes a little more gumption to keep running the ball when you're behind like that. Now, it did work for the Ravens in the third quarter, but you still have them playing from behind, and that's what you want. This defensive line stepped up in a huge way. If they can play like this again and play in the trenches like this on both sides again against Kansas City, major shot to go in there and win, because that's a big difference, especially when you're talking about Creed Humphrey and that interior for the Chiefs. Animals in there. You know what they want to do. They want to get physical. Sometimes a lot of times the Bills have struggled to match that this year. They matched it in this game, and it was a big factor for them.
My most disappointing, unfortunately, one of us has to say it, and you're going to bring up a bigger topic that I want to talk about here in a second, but Mark Andrews has to be. Just an absolutely back-breaking fumble that he has where he's trying to make a move over the middle where it just felt like he was kind of doing too much. That was a situation where it's so hard to criticize a guy in that moment, because it is. Football is just, it's a split-second thing, especially when you're playing that fast at that level. But there's not really any chance for a return on investment for what he's trying to do on that play. I mean, he's trying to make a guy miss just to go into another tackler, and I get that anything could happen, but it was really the time for, okay, catch it, here comes a guy, time to secure it, and we're going to go down here, and we're going to live the fight another down. The ball gets punched out. Obviously, fumbles happen, so it's like, all right, well, okay, it's a bad play. It is what it is. And then, obviously, you have the play at the very end of the game that could have tied it up where, is it the best throw Lamar Jackson's ever made? No. Look, Mark Andrews absolutely should have caught that football. So I think that both of those things can absolutely be true here. And you feel for a guy who is, over the last 5 years, been a major part of what this Ravens offense has been. Whether they were passing a little or passing a lot, he's been a major part of what their identity has been. And it's just really hard to look at the box score and look at the reps and know that his presence could have meant a lot to this game in the wrong direction. And he's a great football player, and it's really hard when you have really good football players who have games like this. But there's no other way to say it's disappointing when you have those 2 plays and they mean so much to the scoreboard when you only lose this game by 2 points.
It's tough. You need your best players to step up, and he is one of their best players. He's been one of their best players for a long time, and I obviously the drop is going to sting. I mean, it's hard to pile on him when he's done so much work for so many years, so much great work for so many years. But that's tough, and I think it's just, again, symbolic of all of the mistakes they made throughout this game. The Ravens had a million opportunities to win this game, and I'll go to mine real quick. I was trying to find a different one, but man, this just stressed me out. That whole situation that we got to with Lamar and a potential game-tying drive and Andrews drop, I'm not a fan at all of.
You've got to go for that, man.
Yeah, I am not a fan at all of kicking that field goal. I know if they're up 6 to go up 9, yeah, absolutely, any day of the week.
Yeah, right, but that's the whole point.
When you're
going for it to make it the 2-possession game.
When you're going against, there's a set of guys. When you're going against them, Mahomes, Lamar, Burrow, Allen, maybe Jaden Daniels, even the Lions. I love the way, we'll get to Dan Quinn and all that, but I love the way the Commanders stayed aggressive in that game.
We'll get to that.
You have to go for the throat. Like, I am not a fan.
You also, okay, go on. I don't want to cut you off.
Like, you have Josh Allen. I know he was stuffed the play before, and that was the big argument probably even on the sideline as well. But you ran that same exact play earlier and scored on it. When you came out in the formation, they saw it coming, okay? Plus the guard was another foot back from the rest of the line. That bothered me. But that field goal, that's a soft field goal. To me, I cannot leave Lamar Jackson a pulse. You know for a fact, John Harbaugh, Lamar Jackson, Todd Monken, everybody on that sideline, when they came out and sent Tyler Bass out there to kick that field goal, they were raising their hands to the sky because we're like, wow, we get a chance. Right? And I get it. If you don't get it, you're down 5. But also, they get the ball at the 2-yard line. And even if they go down and score in the same fashion, okay, you get a minute and a half with Josh Allen. Try to kick a field goal. Like, there's other outcomes that aren't quite as there's that set of guys and that set of teams where you, especially in the playoffs, we live in an age now where you go for the kill. Because to leave Lamar Jackson, and now I feel like now it's inconsistent. Going into Kansas City next week, I don't know what McDermott's going to do in that spot. Because earlier in the year, when they beat the Chiefs,
he was aggressive.
He went for the kill.
Right.
And it worked.
Yes.
And actually, the Chiefs even had a good defensive play call. But because you had Josh Allen, he took off running. He did something Josh Allen-ish, right? Same spot here. I would have sent the offense out there. I'm going for the kill. And if they go 98 yards, then we have to live with that scenario from there. And I know there's a lot of people that are going to backlash this and go, well, because they kicked the field goal, they were up 8, and they had – with this Bills defense and with 17 as your quarterback,
yeah,
you win the game with him. I really think it's bad process, especially when you think about they only finished it off because Mark Andrews dropped the ball.
Right.
I mean, it was wide open.
And I think you also have to be honest about, and I think that's a tough part, right? It's a very blurred line that you have here between believing in your guys and then being honest about where you're at.
And they're losing guys left and right.
Right.
I mean,
you have to
Taylor Rapp's out and Taron Johnson's playing with one arm and you're facing Lamar Jackson. It's a whole scenario
The depleted secondary that you already have. And you also have to recognize, like, what are you hoping for from your defense? You're not hoping that, let's shut them down like we have all game. You haven't.
And there was 3.5.
You haven't.
There was 3.5 minutes. If there was 30 seconds, I might defend it more. But there was 3.5 minutes.
You just had the turnovers, right? You didn't stop Lamar Jackson and company all day. It's not like you've been clamping down. It's not like you go, hey, we're going to bet on our defense because they've been shutting them down all day. No, they haven't. They've just been giving you the football. So not only did I hate it from that logic, but I hate it the most because you took the ball out of your MVP's hands and gave it to theirs. That's what you decided to do. The thing that frustrates me the most about this is
it's playing not to lose.
And I hate that. And it's also like I want the best of Kansas City versus Buffalo. Like these two teams have given us some instant classics over the last 4 years. If you coach like this in Kansas City, you will not win. They will beat you. They will be on to the Super Bowl. Your season will be over. And I hope somebody can tell that to Sean McDermott, is that it's just you cannot think that way. You cannot have the thought process that he had in this game because his team was not playing better. The Baltimore Ravens were playing better than you the whole game. But you had a chance to, what was it, 3 yards, 4 yards? What was it?
2.5, maybe 3.
Something like that. Because I think they lost a couple because he got stuffed or whatever.
They were at no more than 3 yards. And even then I go,
you got 3 yards.
Get 3 yards.
You got 3 yards with one of the alien football players as your quarterback, guaranteed to touch the football, with Joe Brady as his offensive coordinator calling a brilliant game. I know you got stuffed. You got to believe in your guys more than that. You got to believe in Josh Allen more than you believed in your defense for kicking the field goal and setting themselves up that way. That's my only.
Because you know what will happen is next week when you play the Chiefs, they won't turn the ball over 3 times, and Travis Kelce won't drop the ball at the front pylon, and you'll get burned being too cautious. Every team that's too cautious against the Chiefs They lose.
I want the best version of the Buffalo Bills versus the Kansas City Chiefs because we're in for another, again, classic game between these two guys. But Sean McDermott's got to go back to the reasons why they were able to beat them earlier this season.
At the end of the day, if they're going to win a Super Bowl, it's because of number 17.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe the video. And if you don't have a PFF Plus subscription, you can get one to see all the premium stats that we talked about here on the show, plus the expert betting and fantasy advice over at subscribe.pff.com. The description is also right below, so if you are not a PFF Plus subscriber, you can become one today.